Hey, missing listeners. We wanted to bring you an episode that recently aired on our other podcast, Crawlspace.
So for any listener who doesn't know, we do have two shows, and we always want to share episodes of Crawlspace on Missing when they're appropriate and relevant.
So that's what you're getting here. And please make sure to like and subscribe and follow us on social media. Thanks a lot for listening.
The whole point of us doing investigative series is not just to tell the story, but to do the work behind the scenes and leading up to the series where it's like we've actually found a new witness. We've actually found new evidence. We've actually gotten that person back in court. We've actually managed to move the needle. And the podcast, it's just a means to get to that result.
In today's new episode, we speak with attorneys Rabia Chaudry and Colin Miller of the podcast Undisclosed, and we speak to them all about the case that they began podcasting on. It's, of course, the murder of Hae-Min Lee from Baltimore, Maryland in 1999, and their advocacy for Adnan Syed. Lance, what'd you make of this conversation?
Well, it's always great to have them join the show. We had actually joined their show a little while ago and had a really good conversation. It's a little intimidating because they are, and no insult to you or I, Tim, but they are much smarter than us. So when we, what? I know, but when we have the opportunity to have these two minds join us and talk to us about a topic that is honestly really daunting to us. We've often talked about wrongful convictions just being so challenging, not only from the legal perspective, but from the human perspective. It's really amazing to have these two on the show. They talk about Adnan and where he's at today, and also the new stories and cases that they're talking about on Undisclosed. So excellent conversation. They're more than welcome to come back whenever they want and intimidate us with their intelligence again.
Absolutely. And they've got a new season out very soon. So make sure to check out Undisclosed Toward Justice. There are links in the show notes. Let us know what you think of this conversation on YouTube and Spotify. Make sure to follow us on social media. We're going to break quick here for commercial. We'll be right back with Rabia and Colin.
And we're back with Rabia and Colin of Undisclosed.
Welcome to the podcast, Rabia and Colin of Undisclosed. How are you both doing today?
Hey, we're doing great. Happy to be on.
Happy to have you folks on. We've been seeing a little bit of each other in the past few weeks, which is wonderful. It's always great to have conversations with the both of you. You have amazing takes on all of the stories that you cover. I'm super distracted right now. Usually we go into the, hey, introduce yourself to the audience, but I'm super distracted right now because, Colin, you're sitting outside. It looks amazing out there. Where are you?
I am in Columbia, South Carolina. It is nice and sunny and just went for a swim earlier today, so I can't complain.
Would you mind, and whoever wants to start, a quick introduction about yourself, a little background? And
I can start. I'm Rabia Chaudry, and people might be familiar with my involvement with the Adnan Syed case. Most people heard of me when Serial aired many, many years ago now. And I had been kind of working on his case, not directly as a case, but kind of as advocate, big sister figure for many years. And we finally took it to Serial, and that precipitated Undisclosed, the podcast that I do with Colin and formerly Susan Simpson as well. And we covered Adnan's case many years ago on Undisclosed, and that was going to be like the only case we did. And then it just never ended.
And I'm Colin Miller. I'm a professor of law at the University of South Carolina School of Law. I have a blog called Evidence Prof Blog that blogs about evidence law. And as Rabia said, since 2015, we've been doing the Undisclosed podcast, where we do deep dive investigations into cases of wrongful convictions and present them on the podcast with the hope that we can get some freedom and some relief for some of these wrongfully convicted people.
Excellent stuff. So what made you start the podcast?
Oh gosh, what made me start the podcast? So, when Serial was ongoing, I mean, it was insanity. It was like the media was crazy, social media was crazy, like people were losing their minds, and I just couldn't even wrap my head around everything that was happening. But there were two bloggers who caught my eye, and that was Colin Miller and Susan Simpson. I started reading their blogs, and they were both doing these incredible, masterful jobs of analyzing kind of the facts of the case, the evidence in the case, the law in the case. Serial was great in terms of a narrative. It was a good story, but they're neither lawyers nor criminal investigators, and they do not have the skills that people like Susan and Colin did. I am a lawyer, but I also did not have the skills that Susan and Colin did. So, we connected, and I said, listen, I'm happy to share the case files with you to see if you can help in other ways, because when Serial ends, Adnan will still be in prison. And I was also blogging at the time, and my blog was getting a lot of attention. And a friend of mine said, listen, your blogs are great. Colin's blogs are great, Susan, but nobody's reading a 28-page blog on cell phone evidence. You have to figure out a different way you have to get this information to an audience the same way that they got it through Serial. So start a podcast. And none of us had any idea how to do that. We pulled it together very quickly, and we did. We just started a podcast. This was in those early days of podcasting, the Wild West, when you could sound like almost anything and get away with it. And we did. Once the first season, it became a season, but we finished covering Adnan's case, we just started getting requests from defendants, from innocence projects, from family members of people incarcerated. And we kind of didn't want to say no.
I want to ask a couple of questions here about the tone that you saw in Susan and Colin's blogs, in those blogs. What was it about the tone that was different from the ones that you weren't so committed to reading all the time?
Everybody, look, Serial landed on Saturday Night Live. It was such a massive, popular phenomena, and so Variety. There were a million outlets who were covering it week by week by week, but they were not adding anything to the analysis of the case. They're trying to figure out. The whole reason I wanted This American Life to take a look at the case was so that we could try to help find some new evidence to get him in court. We knew he had an appeal pending at the time, but we already knew he was going to lose it, which means you got to find another way to get back into court. I was like, I just need some new evidence. I need some eyes on this. I need people who can help us unpack kind of what we're not seeing. And that's what Susan and Colin were doing, and they were doing it incredibly well. There's so many different things. Colin saw, examining the evidence in the car. Colin took that apart amazingly. Susan was the cell phone person. They were just looking at things in a way that I was not trained to do, and nobody else was doing. They were approaching this as a case that was poorly investigated and had to be reinvestigated, versus this is such a interesting story. Did he or didn't he? And kind of the breathless excitement of it, almost as if it was fiction and not somebody's actual life.
Quick follow-up to you, Colin. How did you decide that was the approach that you were going to take when you started your blog, or was it just natural?
Yeah, so my friend and colleague Claire Raj at the law school came in one day and said, "Are you listening to this new podcast, Serial? You need to check it out. And maybe you can even help out this guy, Adnan. It seems like he was railroaded and wrongfully convicted." And so I started listening and was hooked immediately. And in that very first episode, the whole framing device of Serial is that this attorney, Cristina Gutierrez, who was suffering from so many physical issues and poorly handling cases at the time, failed to contact this alibi witness, Asia McLean. And I thought, to Rabia's point, there's a lot of discussion about this online, but not so much the legal aspect and looking into the legal ramifications of this. And I thought it would be really helpful for my readers and for people listening to the podcast to get a legal perspective on it and see what an evidence professor thought of all the legal issues in the case. And that led to these series of posts that then eventually hooked me up with Rabia.
And Susan, Colin, and I already had blogs. We just then dedicated them to Serial, basically.
Then I guess, what was it like to collaborate and start the podcast? And what was the reaction you got?
Susan was local to me. She was in DC. I'm in Maryland. I said, just swing on, come on by. The files are here. And, whatever we had digitized, I think I shared with Colin, and the collaboration was very natural. I think we all kind of complemented each other in terms of how we were approaching the case and what our roles were in looking at this. When I was like, you guys want to do a podcast? Susan and her husband was great. He was instrumental in helping kind of set up setting up like the whole tech aspect of it. We had our first kind of producer, Dennis Robinson, also an attorney, who also was like, I want to help in any way. And he set up like the legal structure. It came together very quickly. I don't even know how we decided on the name. I think we threw around a few and just landed on Undisclosed. The theme music was like, again, somebody who's like, I volunteer to like write a theme for you. It happens super fast. We had no training. This is not what we do. I think we were all like in our closets recording initially. And I remember the first episode, what happened was the guy who had volunteered to edit couldn't edit. I think his child was sick. Something happened. But we had already announced that we were doing this. And Rolling Stone published, it was in the media that there is a follow-up to Serial. And I'm like, no, it's not a follow-up. But that's how it was being framed. A follow-up to Serial coming out on whatever date. And now we had to get this first episode out. So I, who have zero editing skills even to this day, got on GarageBand and edited the first couple episodes. It was a disaster. It was terrible. We did not know how to do any storytelling. We didn't. We're like, let's just get into the facts. It was bad. And we got but listeners were hooked. But the critics were like rough. The critics were like, it's hard to listen to this crap. This is a terribly produced podcast. And Serial is a beautifully produced show. Like we could not match that, obviously. We're not NPR folks. But our listeners hung in there because they're just captivated by the way what we approach cases. Like, it's everybody's got the murder board and the notes and stuff. And we're good at doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for the endearing quality that a show will have when people hear that it's not this like high budget polished production. When they hear that it's people putting it together by way of their own passion, that really comes through. Like a lot of those audio blips get overlooked because of the words you're saying, and I think it resonates a lot better. And honestly, like that's sort of that's a compliment. If the critics are saying this isn't as polished as Serial, because that's Serial, so we're not them.
Yeah.
We're appealing to somebody else here.
I have to give Serial credit. Like people were so obsessed with that case. Like when Serial ended, you could see online, people were not satisfied. They're like, we want more, we want more, we want more. We happen to be that more. And I think for a lot of them, they're like, for better or worse, we just want to know more about the story. We'll hang in there.
Well, I know we talked on your show about our beginning, and what you described sounds very familiar as far as those criticisms and sort of the beginning of the journey.
And we still get it. We still get it. Yeah. We'll never be Serial. It's fine.
Podcasting requires resilience, right? And so I think they're pretty thick skin. And it's good because a lot of the feedback is constructive and you're able to use that over the years as you sort of hone your craft.
I mean, some of the constructive criticism are definitely Trojan horsed in giant insults. But if you can locate the nugget of constructive criticism in there, it's always
Colin
good.
has a generous heart. I am a little more sensitive than he is, but try not to read the comment section is what we do.
So you mentioned Adnan, and I would love to talk about the case a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about Hae Min Lee?
Hae Min Lee was a senior in high school in 1999. She went to Woodlawn High School with Adnan. She was one of his classmates. They had dated briefly for the year prior. One day, January 13th, 1999, she left school and disappeared. And then a couple months later, her body was found. And I think it was 6 weeks later, February 9th, her body was found not too far from the school in Lincoln Park. And Adnan was arrested for murdering her not long after that, just about a month after that. And he maintained his innocence this entire time. And I knew Adnan since he was like about 12 years old or so. He was my younger brother's best friend. I was in law school when he was arrested. The whole community was shocked. We couldn't believe that he would be arrested at all, much less for murder. I attended the second trial. I think during the first trial, I couldn't attend too much because it was like law school finals. It was towards the end of that year, December of 99. And so, then it was just, he was convicted and it was just, that was it. And the story has stretched out for 26 years now, 27 years almost, yeah.
What was it about the story, Colin, that you decided to, I was going to say put pen to paper and start your blog, but I guess put fingertips to keyboard?
Really, it boils down to, again, that first episode and hearing that there was this alibi witness, Asia McClain, right? And so prosecution's theory of the case at trial that Rabia lays out in the first episode of Serial is that Adnan supposedly gets a ride from Hae Min Lee after school and strangles her in the parking lot of a Best Buy about a mile west of the high school and makes this phone call at 2:36 p.m. from a payphone at Best Buy. And yet there's this alibi witness, Asia McClain, who says between about 2:20 and 2:40 p.m. that day, I saw Adnan at the library next to the high school, and we had this whole conversation. That hooked me initially, and that's followed through not only with Asia as an alibi witness, but our most recent coverage about a year ago is there was another witness named Deion Taylor who was on the baseball team, who has now come forward, and through process of elimination, we've been able to establish that he had a conversation about his car with Adnan sort of right after Adnan would have interacted with Asia McClain. And so this idea of these two high school witnesses as alibis who were not contacted by defense counsel Christina Gutierrez shows all the signs of a wrongful conviction based upon an attorney who dropped the ball.
And so what were your next steps in getting involved in the actual appeal, I guess?
At the time, Adnan was represented by Justin Brown. And Rabia, as she said, had read my blog posts and eventually reached out to Justin Brown and said, listen, this professor is blogging about the case. Why don't you two work together on the appeal? And if you go back into the history and the archives of my blog, I did tons of posts about cases across the country about attorneys who had dropped the ball and not contacted alibi witnesses. And so that was a big part of my participation in the appeal in the case, was to do the legal side of this alibi issue and to try to support the appeal that Justin was putting forward.
You know, there was a pending appeal, but because of Colin's participation and all this, this new attention and all this kind of new information that was coming forward, the petition was amended to include like Asia McClain and other issues. To include other issues. And so, yeah, that was, Colin was very instrumental on the legal front, and then Susan did a lot of investigative work on it too.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
On December 15th, 1994, a young mother and her infant son disappeared from their Catasauqua, Pennsylvania home forever.
When Katranak came home that evening, he found the cellar door to their Front Street home busted in and the wires to an extension phone cut.
Months later, the bodies of 26-year-old Joanne Katranak and her son, Alex Katranak, were found in the woods not far from her home in a crime that both shook and shocked the entire Lehigh Valley.
Why do that? Why the baby?
When the investigation stalls, police put all their focus on one woman, Patricia Rohrer. But the evidence just doesn't add up.
The motive is just so thin.
Murder her and her child because she hung up a phone being that's the only motivation.
And the defense was saying, come on, that can't be a motive. Normal people don't act like that. And he was right. Normal people don't act like that. But this particular person was not normal and acted just that way.
On the new season of Undisclosed, the lives of two mothers and two children destroyed. The state versus Patricia Rohrer.
I've been down for 26 years for a crime I did not commit.
Make sure to subscribe on all your favorite podcast platforms.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
And where are we at now? Between the two of you, how are you framing this now?
I mean, look, where I say we are now is that I feel we are kind of very much, for better or worse, at the end of the line. From here on out, it's up to Adnan what he wants to pursue or not pursue. Adnan is out on probation. He is living his life. He's working. He's been out for 3 years, now more than 3 years. He is happily married. He's living his life. He did not get a full exoneration as we had hoped. He was exonerated. Then the court reinstated charges. And there's a lot of political stuff that happened in Baltimore with the district attorneys. I mean, it was a nightmare. Those couple of years were a nightmare because it was just, Adnan got used as kind of a political pawn between two district attorneys, basically, is what happened. But at the end of the day, he was basically under the Juvenile Restoration Act, which was a law that we helped get passed in Maryland because he was sentenced as juvenile. He was resentenced to time served, given 5 years probation, and that's what he's serving now. But he is otherwise, he's a free citizen. He does have the conviction on his record. He can seek exoneration through other means, and that's on him to see if he does that.
To Rabia's point, he works at the Prisons and Justice Initiative at Georgetown University. And what they do is they, among other things, have a class with undergraduate students called Making an Exonerate, which is sort of the flip side of Making a Murder from the Stephen Avery case from Netflix. And the students in that program each semester are given a wrongful conviction case, and they investigate it and put together a short documentary video that they presented a gala at the end of the semester. And one of those cases was the Amanda Lewis case, which is the most recent series for Undisclosed, where I was the lead investigator. And they also did the Patty Aurora case, which is Rabia's current case, where she's the lead investigator and that we're about to present on the podcast.
Yeah, that's our next season of Undisclosed. It drops May 25th. It's a wrongful conviction of Patricia Rohrer. We get a lot of case referrals from Georgetown. They're great to work with.
Okay, great segue. Do you want to get into the upcoming episodes and this new story?
Yeah, I've been working on this. So I'm lead investigator on this. I've been working on this for a little over a year now. This stems back to a double homicide that took place in 1994, December 1994. A woman by the name of Joanne Katranak and her son, who was 4 months old, Alex Katranak, disappeared kind of eerily like Heyman Lee one day, December 15th, 94. They disappeared one day and, her husband comes home. His family's not home, doesn't know where they are. Their bodies are discovered months later. In a wooded area about 20 miles from the house. And she has been brutally murdered. She was beaten and shot. The baby was left laying on her stomach on top of his mother, died either of exposure or asphyxiation, but had not been shot or otherwise hurt. It wasn't for another year or so. I think it was like almost 2 years later that Patricia Rohrer, and this happened in Pennsylvania, but Patricia Rohrer was arrested for the murders. So what is Patricia? And she lived in North Carolina. And her connection to the victims, she had never met them, but she had dated the victim's husband years prior. Many years earlier. At the time of her arrest, Patricia, and at the time of this murder, she lived in North Carolina. At the time of her arrest, she had a baby girl. I think he was like 18 months old. There are 2 mothers and 2 children who are victims here, right? There's the mother obviously was killed, her and her child, and then Patricia herself, who lost her entire life, never saw her daughter again. 18 months old, and she has been in prison since 1997, maintained her innocence the entire time. This case has gotten coverage in different ways. It's not like that we're not going to be the first ones covering it, but we are the first ones doing kind of a long form investigative series on it. And I'm, working directly with Patricia and her lawyer and her longtime advocate. It is a mind-boggling case in terms of how the prosecution was able to get a conviction out of this, considering she was hundreds of miles away, and considering how obvious, I think some other leads were in terms of trying to figure out who killed the victims. The new season starts May 25th. It will run about 2 months, I believe. Our Monday episodes are the ones that, it's the investigative series, and then we have kind of a companion episode every Thursday where we kind of talk about the stuff that didn't get in or answer questions from listeners. So I'm excited.
Very cool. Wow. Interesting. Definitely can't wait to hear that coverage. Sounds like a really disturbing case. What was it about the circumstances of the homicides that made you believe this was a wrongful conviction?
A lot of these cases come to us through like an Innocence Project, right? And this one came through the Innocence Clinic at Georgetown University. So there's already been kind of a tremendous amount of vetting done. So that kind of helps. I did not have to necessarily be convinced in this case, but one of the hardest things to overcome in this case is the fact that there was actual DNA evidence that linked her. And that was what the prosecution relied on. They relied on, we're talking about forensics in the 90s, 97. Like, you know what I mean? This is when everybody believed in the CSI effect, and they thought any scientist or whatever forensic expert who testified really knew their stuff. But a lot of the science is shaky. There's been a lot of misconduct in this case. The factors were already there. We didn't have to spend too much time trying to figure out like whether or not this is an actual innocence case. What was really interesting, there's so many interesting things about this case, but what's fascinating is like the motive that the state argued. Like why would Patricia kill Joe, right? Well, according to the state, Patricia was still not, the victim's husband, his name's Andy Katranak. Patricia and the victim's husband had not dated in many, many, many years, but they remained friends and friendly. Once or twice a year, they would call each other. And she had made a phone call to the house a couple of times in that year, in 94. And the most recent time she had called, Joanne had picked up the phone and said, "Why are you calling our house? He is happily married. We have a kid," and cussed her out and hung up. So the state's theory was like, she was so enraged by that phone call, by that hang up, that she got in a car and drove 10 hours, committed the murders and drove 10 hours right back to North Carolina. And they not only was the husband able to convince the investigators that this is what happened, because he was the first one to point the finger at Patricia that very night that his wife disappeared, which is also a super odd thing to do, for you to be thinking of this other person, hundreds of miles away. It's one of those things, and we see this a lot in wrongful convictions when investigators decide this is our person, then they start making the case, right? then they will do things like, in this case, there was a witness who was going to come and testify, a witness from North Carolina who was going to come and testify and say, I saw her like the day that this woman, an officer went to that person and convinced him not to come to testify. So they create the circumstances that they're able to show the jury what they want to show and hide what they want to hide and manipulate the facts here, and the jury bought it.
When a story like this comes to the point in production where you realize like this is what we're going to be focusing on for the new season, how do you then delegate who's going to be doing what and who's going to be looking into what without overlapping on each other?
For each of these cases, one of us is the lead investigator, and that person will be the primary lead in talking to witnesses, going through the evidence, and scripting the episodes we'll eventually present on the podcast. And then typically what will happen is that lead investigator will delegate certain duties to kind of the second in command. And so in this case, as Rabia mentioned, the linchpin for the state's case consists of hairs. There are questions about whether these hairs actually are a match for Patricia Rohr or not. And so as one example, Rabia had myself and my students look into the issue of this hair comparison that was done. And for me, this is a huge part of this case because back in 2015, the FBI came forward and said from roughly 1972 to 1999, these hair comparisons that were being done were completely faulty and false positives and not based upon the scientific method. In this case, falls squarely within that range. And so we'll delve into it in this series, but these questions about these faulty hair comparisons for about 25, 27 years have caused any number of wrongful convictions. And all these other cases like Patricia Rohr's case that we think are innocent people who are still behind bars.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
This might sound like a, getting into the minutia type question, but when you are presented with that, where do you go? Like, who do you reach out to? What experts do you start to solicit?
I think there is some scope. I mean, look, we did this with Adnan's case, right? Like the cell phone expert who testified during Adnan's trial was able to come back all these years later after he was presented with a fuller picture of the evidence of the cell and say, I was wrong. I did not have the full picture. We brought him back. So I think that is one way to attack this evidence. However, in this particular case, and look, now Patricia also is in a situation where she's kind of at the end of the line in her most recent appeals. When you file an appeal and you have certain issues, they are litigated all the way up generally to the state Supreme Court. Then maybe they're taken into the federal court. She recently was denied again, and she has worked so hard for these decades of trying to get herself justice, filing petition after petition after petition. But at some point, you will exhaust all the issues you have unless you're able to find new evidence. And so there are I'm not going to talk about what that evidence is right now, but there are two things that I'm very focused on trying to find. And I feel like if we can find either one of those two things, they could grant her a new trial. The whole point of us doing the investigative series is not just to tell the story, but to do the work behind the scenes and leading up to the series where it's we've actually found a new witness. We've actually found new evidence. We've actually gotten that person back in court. We've actually managed to move the needle. And the podcast, it's just a means to get to that result. So again, you got to listen to the series to figure out what it is we're looking for, what it is that could get Patricia not just another trial, but maybe even fully exonerate her. There is evidence that should exist that we know was collected by somebody and then disappeared. And this is the problem. It's you got these dirty cops, right? So we know something, we know some evidence was collected. Where did it go? And we're trying to track that down right now.
Yeah, and to answer your question in terms of my most recent series, the Amanda Lewis case I mentioned earlier, this is a case out of Esto, Florida, in which a mother was accused of fatally drowning her daughter in the family above ground pool. And there were these vertical bruises on the daughter's face. And so I spoke to a drowning expert. I spoke to experts on grip strength. I spoke to bruising experts, and I spoke to a medical examiner who actually replicated the above ground pool, got a volleyball, put on red paint in her hands. And, the conclusion they were able to reach collectively was the state's theory didn't work because if you think about it, if you're sort of gripping someone's face and pushing them underwater, the pressure is going to be in your fingertips, producing oval or circular bruises, not these vertical bruises. And so that's kind of what I do when I'm handling these cases is I reach out to these experts and say, listen, I'm asking for pro bono free assistance. We're getting really granular. Let's dig into the specific issues here and see if we can kind of look back on these issues presented at trial and see if we can deconstruct.
I don't even know how to ask this question, but I'm going to give it a shot. How do you avoid approaching it with any sort of preconceived notion or judgment on whether or not how you want it to turn out is in fact the case? You know what I mean? Like, you're certainly not looking for a discrepancy in what they said the bruises were and how the bruises were caused. But do you get some sort of gratification when you're like, no, that's not correct?
A, I get gratification, but B, to answer your question, I do enter every case with a bias in favor of this person being guilty. I'm looking for reasons not to take the case and reasons to think this person might be guilty. And it takes me going through the files and looking over every witness statement and every piece of testimony to eventually say, this person's wrongfully convicted. So my bias coming in is always, this was a rightful conviction. I need to be convinced it was a wrongful conviction.
So I actually am completely the opposite. I approach the cases completely the opposite way around. And you have to understand, by the time it gets to air, by the time we've decided we're taking this case on, we're investigating it, we're working on the case for the defendant, and then we're making a series, we have already done the vetting. We have decided that. So yes, we are making, when you listen to our series, it is created with the bias that we do believe this person's actually been wrongfully convicted. This person's actually innocent of the crime, even more so than not just not wrongfully convicted, but actually there's an actual innocence case to be made. The way that I approach it is that when I look at these cases and I see like the police investigative reports, like, how did the investigation unfold from day one, all the witness statements, the forensics, like I do what we heard in Serial. Deirdre Enright, who is the executive director of the UVA Innocence Clinic, or at least was at the time Serial aired, she said, what you want to do is return the presumption of innocence to that defendant and then start making your case. And so what I do is, it's like in my mind, I am back when they were arrested and they're innocent until proven guilty. Now I want to see the state's evidence, right? And I want to see what the state actually has versus what was presented in court. Because people think, okay, if somebody was convicted by jury of their peer, yeah, but that jury is not almost ever going to see the full picture. Like they never almost get to see the full picture. There's evidence that's excluded. There's evidence that's not right. There's evidence that's manipulated. There's forensics that are presented inaccurately all the time. There's alibis that never make it in, right? There's witnesses that's overlooked. I mean, there's so much stuff the jury never gets to hear. So they're making a decision based on like this tiny little snapshot of whatever they're presented. So I need to be convinced that this person's guilty. I do it kind of backwards from Colin, and most of the time, all the same red flags are there. The forensics don't work. I mean, they've got some alibis. The defense was terrible. Like they did not get a proper defense. A lot of times the conviction is based on like really bad eyewitness testimony type of thing, or like, witness identification that's flawed, or false confessions. We've seen this many times too with younger defendants. So it's like you start to recognize these red flags. And when they're there, then that I think requires a deeper look at what you're looking at. And there are cases, by the way, that I have turned away and Colin's turned away. We're like, we just couldn't get there.
And you mentioned that some people can get sort of mixed up in the politics of the situation, depending on the current times for the prosecutor and the defense. Does that happen often?
Unfortunately, it's starting to creep in some more, in the sense that the biggest innovation in the innocence world is the so-called Conviction Review Unit, the CRU, which is the prosecutor's office, sometimes the attorney general, reviewing these convictions and coming to a conclusion about whether this was a wrongful or rightful conviction. Increasingly, we're seeing disputes between the state and the local prosecutor's office, or prosecution and defense are in lockstep, and yet the judge is refusing to approve it, often because there's not legislation in the state. And so I wish there were less politics in it. The CRUs across the country are a novel development that are doing a lot of good, but there still is a lot of red tape that's causing confusion.
And I think anytime, there's some media attention on a particular case, it's a sword that cuts both ways. It makes those in charge, it makes them kind of like gird their loins and really dig in, because they have to defend the institutions. They want to defend the investigators. They want to defend the conviction because if the conviction's overturned, it can have all kinds of implications for the state, like lawsuits and stuff. Even though a lot of times we need that attention. We are presenting these cases because there's been plenty of times when us airing a case, reporting on a case has brought forth new evidence, right? But again, like when prosecutors don't want to be challenged publicly, right? They don't like it. And so it is hard to avoid kind of like the political and the personal. I think sometimes it gets really personal for them.
Where do you go from there? How much do you battle toe-to-toe with them?
In every case that I've worked where like the families are involved, and even local attorneys, because we're never representing these folks directly. We're working with local attorneys. It could be a local innocence project or whoever. They want to play nice with the prosecutor's office. They need to, right? I get that. But at some point, when every single thing you're trying to do, like let's say you're trying to get DNA testing in your brother's case and they just won't, they fight the DNA testing. They fight. Why? Why are you fighting it unless you want to hide the truth? At some point, I'm like, then you need a political solution. Then the next time this person is running for that office, you need to find the right candidate to challenge them. You need to make it difficult for them to get reelected based on like their positions in this case and their positions in general on how they handle these matters. Where do you go? That has obviously we did kind of do that in Baltimore. Backing certain candidates. It did not exactly work out the way we wanted always because at the end of the day, politicians going to politic. You know what I mean? You don't know what their hidden agendas are. It's complicated. I do think elected officials should be held to account for when they are behaving badly in their positions.
And I'd also say that one thing we've done is to ignore a lot of public feedback regarding certain politicians and claims that they would never act in favor of the wrongfully convicted. And so Governor Kay Ivey, staunch conservative Republican in Alabama. I did a series on the Rocky Myers case. Rabia spearheaded a recent episode on the Sonny Burton case. Both men were on death row. We asked our listeners and worked with the legal teams to get them taken off death row. And Governor Ivey in Alabama commuted both their sentences and took them off death row. And so the innocence work is not necessarily partisan. It doesn't necessarily go along party lines the way you would expect it to do so. And so sometimes you take it all the way to the top of the state and ask for the governor to take action.
And that must have come as a bit of a surprise.
A relief, I can say.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the response of the local prosecutors in both the Rocky Myers case and the Sonny Burton case, they were not happy.
Yeah.
They very much came out and blasted Governor Ivey in the press. And so it was not just a surprise to us, but to the local prosecutors in those cases.
Rocky Myers and Sonny Burton, only 3 people have ever escaped execution once they've been sentenced to death in that state. And those are 2 of the 3.
Thank you so much for chatting with us here today. This has been a great conversation. I'm glad that we sort of went through your history with the podcast and caught us all the way up to the present. Best of luck with the new season. Certainly welcome back anytime. Would love to get into the minutia of some of these cases too.
Yeah, we'd love to maybe jump back on after the season airs, and I hope you guys take a listen to it. It's a fascinating story and a real tragic case.
And when is it going to be coming out?
May 25th. Fingers crossed.
Are you going to be editing on May 24th?
I will not. We're actually recording episode 1 this week, so it should, well in time. But, it's one of those things, and this is actually true for, I think, a lot of the series. The investigation is ongoing even as we are scripting and recording. Just like a week ago, I got 2 new boxes of evidence, and it's like, all right, well, that's going to take time to go through. This is just how it is. But it's all good. It's a good thing we have our own show. We can make as many follow-up episodes as we need.
Absolutely. And you're, like Tim said, you're more than welcome to come back on as the case develops. If you need anything in the meantime, let us know. But yep, doors open for you. Good work.
Thank you so much. It was good to see you guys.